Hello and welcome, and I'm your host Konstantin Kogan, and we're here at Holistic Investments, and I have here an amazing guest today. Today with us is Michael Kong, who is CEO of Phantom Foundation. Hi, Michael.
Hey, it's great to be here. Thanks so much for the opportunity.
Thank you for being here. Like we've been planning this for quite a while. I know that the viruses stand in our way, like conferences, other things, but I'm really excited that we're finally doing this episode. Like I've been a fan of Phantom Foundation from basically the beginning of it. Like so it's a great honor. And as always, we have to throw a legal and compliance disclaimer that this content is for informational purposes only. You should not construe any such information or other material as legal, tax, investment, financial, or any other advice. Now that we're off the hook, we can talk about a lot of things, but traditionally, I want to begin with you, Michael, right? You've been in this space for years, so you can be called easily an OG in this space. And you have experience not only in Phantom Foundation, but you've been basically a professor, if I'm not like, or a teaching assistant, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Definitely not a professor. No, no, no. Yeah.
But in a way, you've been teaching, you've been in a space for quite a while. But I want to hear from you. What was this like this critical, this tipping point, which actually made you like feel that this is it, this is my industry, I want to stay here.
Yeah, that's a great question. I initially heard about Bitcoin or blockchain technology. It was only really Bitcoin back in like 2012 because I was listening to this quite famous, or I guess notorious now, podcaster in the space called not in the space, sorry, but like an investor called Peter Schiff, who was talking. He talks a lot about gold and gold investing and libertarian ideals and free markets and that sort of thing. And he actually was talking about Bitcoin back in 2012 when the price was obviously a lot lower, and it was just starting to emerge. And he was like obviously pretty negative about Bitcoin, as he is like right now, and has been very consistent about it. But he did get like a number of guests early on back then to talk about digital currencies and Bitcoin, and he would sort of have debate on them with them. This was back when he had what was known as the Schiff Radio, or the Peter Schiff Show on Sirius XM. So I would listen in from Australia, where I was at the time, late night. But because he was quite negative about it and explained why he was negative about it, I never really had that much interest in it, because I thought maybe technically it wouldn't work. But then 2013 came around, and there were a number of people around where I live who were talking about Bitcoin in more detail and about how it could pretty much work. And I started to listen a bit more towards them, to them, and it kind of made sense to me. So I ended up acquiring some Bitcoin there, but I wasn't really too much interested in working in the space because I saw it more of like the payments and store of value, and that just wasn't what I was really interested in at the time. I was studying computer science or IT and finance at the University of Sydney. But then a few years later, around 2015, 2016, there were a number of people on campus who were essentially evangelizing about this new project that was emerging called Ethereum. And they were going around to different people and were like, you'll be having conversation with people like in the IT room amongst your friends, and they would just like sit down and like kind of like interrupt, and they'll be like, hey guys, have you heard of this thing called Ethereum? It's like basically the future. It's kind of like Bitcoin, except you can program these things called smart contracts, and you can put all this stuff on smart contracts. And you should really get in, because this is basically going to be like the future of everything. And I listened to one of those individuals who was a friend of a friend, and it sort of struck with me because I was like, oh wow, I didn't realize that you could add all this programmable functionality into a blockchain. So then I did some private research about smart contracts and how they worked, and about Ethereum, and I was like, wow, there really are potential massive use cases for this technology. And then I was very fortunate at the time that I managed to join a research group that was focused on building smart contract security tools for the Ethereum network. It was sort of like one of those very early on security checking tools. Now there's quite a few that are much more sophisticated than what we did in the past. But I was part of a research project led by a professor called Professor Bernard Schultz, and he also happens to have joined the Phantom team over the past couple of years, and he's now leading a lot of our research and development when it comes to the new sonic technology, which I guess we'll get into. So I spent a couple of years in that research group building these smart contract verification tools. I did like a undergraduate thesis on it. And then afterwards in 2017, 18, I set up a cryptocurrency fund with a few people who were from traditional finance, but very interested in the cryptocurrency blockchain space. And that's how it basically came to Phantom. We were advising on and raising funds for a number of ICOs at the time. So this was during the 2017, 2018 ICO period, where there were a lot of different ICOs that were happening. And one of the projects was this project called Phantom based in Korea. And what they had claimed to have done was invented a new like blockchain technology that would basically be a lot faster and cheaper and just a lot more scalable than existing technology. And so they got a lot of traction because of the promises they had made and because of their backgrounds, and also geographically being in Korea, which is a very big cryptocurrency market. They managed to get a lot of hype, and we managed to raise for them approximately 41 million US dollars. So it was one of the biggest ICOs at the time in early to mid June 2018. But then unfortunately afterwards, we soon discovered when we had like reviewed the technical documents more in depth that what they actually promised was not real. It didn't actually exist. And so we were kind of like in a panic and we're figuring out, okay, what do we do here? Because effectively, we've raised money for something that is not real and they haven't been honest with us about it. That's where like Andre Cronje actually came in and was involved with Phantom. So Andre has basically been involved in, he's very well known in the DeFi space as being, the so-called DeFi god, and is building, a lot of DeFi primitives that a lot of people have forked and improved upon. But he was involved in Phantom very early on, all the way back in mid 2018. And he sort of identified the Phantom project as having potential because he had done a review on it when it was a writer at Crypto Briefing. And he had basically reached out to us and was keen to figure out more about the technology. And then when I told him that the technology didn't actually turn out to be real, he told me that he had a lot of different ideas when it came to distributed ledgers and that he would try and get something working. So I ended up working with him in building a new technical team. And basically, we worked very hard for like the next year and a half up until the last few days of 2019 when we launched the first version of the Phantom mainnet. So that came out on about December the 27th, 2019. And so Phantom is really like one of the oldest chains out there with the exception of Ethereum. So that's sort of like the background to like how I got into the position that I am in now.
First of all, it's amazing you already threw couple of bombs here, like in terms of like that Phantom actually did not have a technology, right? I did not know that. And this is, I think it's one of those, actually, I commend you for this honesty, because it's one of those stories that you understood it, but instead of like just dumping the project and cashing out, as a lot of people in crypto unfortunately do, you actually decided, wait a minute, we can attract new talent and we can actually build something and make sure this is successful. Which is by itself is already impressive and shows your serious approach to business, right? We know a lot of stories. I don't want to put some names, but like bad examples when people raise money and then understand there's no technology and we tried, nothing happened, and they just like disappear, right? And abandon the project. So in your case, you reversed like, the situation and made a success. Now, talking about the success, I'm sure like even though it's one of the oldest blockchains, you went through all the challenges of attracting the community. And when I say community, not only users, it's mostly developers, which is by itself a very challenging task. And I wanted to talk a little bit about it, like, how did you attract like predominantly developers? Because in my experience talking to the foundations, this is one of the core. When you have a strong developer base, like a strong developer support, and it's global, then everything else kind of it builds up on top of it, right? So correct me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I mean, in order for a chain to be successful, in my opinion, it's not just about like the technology. It's about getting developers and users, right? Because if you just have the technology and the platform, but nobody uses it, you don't really have like a successful ecosystem, right? Conversely, if you're able to attract like a lot of users and interest, but you don't really have the technology ready, then you also don't have like a ecosystem because there's nothing that people can build upon, right? So you kind of need like both like a solid technology platform and like great business development to attract developers and users. I think Phantom in the past has had like a lot of issues with more on the business development side rather than on the technology side. I think our technology is very, very solid. I stand by the fact that we're one of the like oldest chains out there. We've been running almost continuously since the end of 2019. So it's been like, over like 3 or 4 years that it's been like running. And, we've got this like new amazing technology coming out called Sonic, where, we've been able to demonstrate really serious and great performance numbers. And these are not just numbers that, we're going to afford like, out of thin air, or that are just completely theoretical, or like are just like numbers that are run on a single machine. These are numbers that are run on like very similar infrastructure and transactions that operate on the current like Phantom mainnet that we call the Opera network. And there are like two testnets out there where anybody can see the transactions, right? Anybody can see, what's going into a block. Anyone can see like the data that's being processed. Anyone can see the results in terms of, low confirmation times and high throughput. So I think our technology is very solid, and I haven't really seen many people criticize our technology. They've been like very supportive of it because it's been very stable. On the other hand, though, we've kind of like haven't been as focused on business development, because I think our approach in the past has been, let us just build the tech and they will come. And to a certain extent, that's true in that, you do get some developers who identify your chain and go, wow, it's stable, it's fast, I can build something on there, it's cheap to run stuff, it's just convenient to use. But if all you have is like the technology and you don't really do much like advertising or promotion of the chain, you're going to be outcompeted by competitors who are doing exactly that, right? So I think one of the key reasons why Phantom is, it's quite a like, it's quite a well-known and prominent blockchain that's been around for a while. But I think the reason why, other blockchain projects out there that are a lot bigger than Phantom and its ecosystem are because they not only just focus on technology development, they also focus on all these business development areas. And so I think like what we want to do going forward is really focus a lot more on business development initiatives and doing what we should have done in the past, right? And that's as, focusing on, coordinated airdrops with ecosystem partners, focusing on, providing grants and liquidity incentives for major projects to want to deploy on Phantom. It's about getting the involvement from angel investors and VCs to want to have a success, a significant stake in the chain, so their interests with growing the chain are aligned with ours as well. So these are all like the sort of initiatives that we're putting a lot of effort into now that we kind of didn't really do in the past.
So if I may like ask you, so like let's maybe like jump a little bit on the technology, and I'm sure it's going to help us to answer also the previous question, right? So Phantom is EVM compatible chain, right? So we're talking about like a very scalable, fast solution that is secure by smart contracts. And you also run a pretty interesting, I would say, in a way, like a unique ABFT consensus protocol. Can you elaborate a little bit, like how is your ABFT protocol is different, let's say, from Ethereum or from other like EVM-based chains?
Yeah. So Ethereum doesn't have asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerance. So what we mean by this term, ABFT is the acronym, is that essentially it's a mechanism of being able to confirm transactions on the network in a more scalable manner than doing it synchronously, right? And so there's a lot of technical terms in what we just mentioned, but to kind of break it down by an analogy, is sort of like consider like you're boarding a train, right? And the train has a certain number of carriages, right, or blocks, right? In a synchronous network, you basically process like one train at a time, right? Or one carriage at a time, right? So the train arrives, everyone boards the train, and the train departs, right? Another train comes, you board the train departs, right? In an asynchronous network, what essentially happens is that you can board multiple trains at the same time, right? So instead of just boarding one train at a time, maybe you board 3, maybe you board 5, maybe you board 10, right? And the fact that you're boarding multiple trains simultaneously means that you're going to get more throughput, right? You're going to be able to send more passengers through, right? And that's basically analogous to the difference between an asynchronous network like Phantom and a synchronous network like Ethereum, right? So for Ethereum, they process one block every 12 or 14 seconds, right? And it's one block that gets confirmed by the network and propagated to all the nodes. For Phantom, you can actually have different parts of the network confirm different numbers of transactions. And then via what we call like the consensus algorithm, which is consisting of a lot of like tricky mathematics, to be honest. It's the hardest part or the most complex part of the whole Phantom ecosystem. A lot of nodes talk to one another such that you get those final ordering of transactions in the end, right? So you always need to have a final ordering of transactions, meaning that you know that one transaction came earlier than another, which came earlier than another. If you don't have that consistent ordering of the ledger across nodes, then you have inconsistencies as to like, you know, who owns what assets on chains, which is a big problem. So because we've been able to figure out, like using clever algorithms, a way for the network to process multiple transactions simultaneously, yet still somehow end up with a final ordering that's correct for all nodes, that's where the scalability kicks in, right? And there are other like networks out there that have also employ an asynchronous mechanism. Like Avalanche has a variation of it, Hashgraph has a variation of it. There's a few others as well. So, to be honest, we're not the only one. But the reason why that other chains, including ourselves, have taken this approach is because, as I just highlighted in, the analogies that I use with the trains, it just leads to a much more scalable network. And it's something that I think Ethereum will always kind of struggle with in the future, because it's very hard for them to change their kind of the consensus mechanism from synchronous to asynchronous, which is why like you've kind of seen like the narrative shift with Ethereum over time, where now the narrative is about, okay, let's forward and build these like L2s where a lot of computation will happen kind of like off chain from Ethereum, and they will and then the results will be written to Ethereum itself, right? So they're trying to offload computation from the Ethereum network to other networks because the network is not scalable to handle the large volume of transactions that they're processing, which is why transaction fees from Ethereum are going much, much higher than, say, for other chains like Phantom.
It's beautiful how you provided this example, because I remember the example that Joseph Lubin actually explained in 2017 in a room like and that was in Brooklyn. I think it was somewhere in Williamsburg, and there was like 500 people in a presentation. He explained this Byzantine general problem, which was actually, as we know right now, is like it was describes the difficulty of coordinating actions in several dependent parties in a distributed system, right? And this problem was
That's correct,
and it was discovered in not so long ago. People forget it's like in only 1982. Like only now, so think about it, like only like 20, 30 years after, we're talking about like the real solutions, and only like 10 to 15 years after, we're applying those solutions, right? So what you're doing, I know that you're saying, you're not, very humbly, that you're not unique, but I think the fact that you already solved this problem and it's actually working, right, and it's in a secure way, it's quite unique.
Well, I think we are unique in terms of technology, in like how we've kind of achieved the level of scalability that we have with the Sonic technology. I think that's where like we are definitely unique, which is not just to do with like the consensus engine itself, mind you, but it is to do with like all parts of the technology stack, because there are a lot of parts of the technology stack that go into having a platform that can execute smart contracts. It's not simply just like the consensus, although that is obviously a very important point. It's funny how you mentioned that the solution to the Byzantine generals problem has, or the description of it, that hasn't been around for that long, going back to like 1982. I mean, like, I guess like in the history of like, humanity, 1982 is not that far away, but in the crypto space, in the industry that we're in, that's like light years away, right? And you're right, like, this sort of problem about how you get consensus among nodes has been described, in 1982, as you mentioned, or maybe even earlier than that. And, there was an analogy used when it came to like, generals coordinating from different areas to, attack a castle. I won't get into like the whole like analogy of it, because it'll take a little while. But essentially, I think a solution to that Byzantine generals problem or communication problem was solved pretty easily in a closed network. In other words, like a permission network, because if you have a little rules as to like, okay, all these participants in the network are trusted, we can trust those messages, and therefore we don't really need to worry if they're not going to be trusted or not. But what blockchain technology solved for, or Bitcoin initially specifically solved for, was finding like a more generalized solution to that problem, right? In other words, being able to run a public network where anybody can join and leave the network at a time, and having like the right economic incentives in order for people to be trustworthy. So the entire consensus engine, including for Phantom, operates on, having the validators who validate transactions or the miners validate the transactions, having economic incentive to make sure that the transactions that they confirm are honest, right? And they're always operating honestly. Because if honesty breaks down in the network, the value of the network goes down, which means that the people who've invested in the network, like the validators or the miners, they lose a lot of money as well. So the way that I think of like blockchain technology is not so much like, and it is not so much as entirely like a new mathematical algorithm that's discovered or some like amazing like general theory or something like that. The way I kind of think about it is that it's a collection of different ideas, like the Byzantine generals problem, like other ideas coming together and being engineered in a very, very smart way, where you have this sort of economic system in place that allows people to run this public network or a series of public networks that we have at the moment.
No, it's an amazing problem that you solve, like, because you're right. It's basically you're trying to solve this like the problem where honest nodes must achieve consensus, even with dishonest nodes in the mix. Disregarded, and it's an open source product which can be used by anyone. Anyone, as I understand, can run a node. Like it's not restricted. So you have to make sure that the system is working and it's fair for everyone, which is not an easy task if you think about it just logically, if you forget about the complexity of the technology. So the fact that you're solving is already a huge achievement. Now let's come back to the other features, because I know that you solve not one problem, you solve several. And the Phantom is, just as a reminder for anyone who's we're under the rock and still only now learning about Phantoms. It's permissionless, it's centralized, it's open source, and there is an amazing speed, right? If I'm not mistaken, like that finality of the transaction is 1-2 seconds on average, right? Somewhere around that.
Yeah, that's at the moment with the current technology. With the new technology world coming out, it's actually a lot lower than that. So we've proven in publicly available data that anyone can scrutinize themselves. Again, not theoretical, not in completely ideal conditions, but on conditions mimicking the network in our test net, we can process over 2,000 transactions per second, and we can have a time to finality of 0.8 seconds, right? Or even in like even being able to process 180 million daily transactions, which is far above like how many transactions occur on all blockchains together, we get a time to finality even as low as like 0.3 or 0.4, which is starting to get down to like the minimum amount of connection time that you can have between the nodes. And so I think that's incredible because, Ethereum takes, 12, 14 seconds. Other chains out there also do take several seconds, but we're able to do a fraction of that. And that really opens up like a lot of different opportunities for being able to use this new technology.
Now, we do hear sometimes, criticism from traditional, folks like that say, well, it all sounds amazing, but, like Visa and MasterCard can process tens of thousands of transactions per second. So how do you compete with them, right? So how would you reply to that, traditional, I wouldn't call it a myth, but criticism?
Yeah, so this is actually a good point that you raised, because when I said, transactions per second, I didn't actually define what I mean by a transaction, right? So that number that I just quoted has to do with what we call like smart contract transactions, right? So there's different levels of complexity with transactions. The most simple transactions are when I'm just basically sending one token from myself to you. But more complicated transactions are, if I'm engaging in various DeFi protocols, lending and borrowing, conducting swaps, especially conducting swaps between multiple assets in one transaction. There's a lot of complexity that can go into a single transaction. So we've actually done experimentation as to like more simple swaps, right? More simple transactions that would occur typically on the Phantom network, which tend to be more complicated transactions. And when we do more simple transactions, we can get close to like what Visa and MasterCard can process in terms of like payments, right? So for like simple swaps on the Phantom or on the Sonic network, even to do with a smart contract, we're already getting between like 10 to 20,000. And I'm sure if we do like even the more basic swaps than that, we'll get into a few tens of thousands as well per second. So I think like our technology stack can really compete against the level of processing power that Visa and MasterCard have, which is incredible because it means that the Phantom network can not only be used in a public and permissionless way to process transactions, similar to the business models of like Visa and MasterCard and others that you mentioned, these payment providers, but it also opens up a wide range of possibilities where it's not just payments, but it's anything to do with like any smart contract, right? Whether it's like various decentralized finance-based applications, or gaming, or distributed AI, or basically many different use cases for blockchain technology. You can also run it on Phantom, submitting transactions to and from individuals.
Yeah, and by the way, there is a lot of investigations debunking the fact that they even do that tens of thousands. And in reality, it's maybe like 1700s per second, like, which again doesn't matter. To your point, it's a very different approach and a very different logic and mechanism how to even like process the data. Like, and it's important that it's not only one transaction. The smart contract can be not only in a financial transaction, even your data that is transferred in a secure way, which is already like super important, where you control the data. I think it's already an achievement of like distributed ledger technology as a, you know, as a wholesome industry, right, so to speak. My question to you, and a lot of other like criticism I hear from people who are still learning about this new technology, is like, okay, so it's all great. You guys are smart, you're fast, like, but it's still for geeks. The UI is not super friendly. Like, show me what are the killer app, like, you know, the case studies. So let's talk about the practicality. Can you share with us some of the case study that with maybe traditional businesses that you already work in, and in collaboration, you're actually making the world a better place, faster, I don't know, more secure, cheaper transactions, or like in any other form, how you can, you know, showcase and for the average person?
Yeah, so I think it's important to keep in mind that this technology has not been around for like many years, right? So, Bitcoin Network was launched, I think it was about January 2009. And, the first smart contract platform, Ethereum, was launched in July 2015. That was the first public mainnet that they called Frontier, if I remember correctly. And so, it hasn't even been 9 years, right? It's been about like 8.5 years, coming up to 9 years, right? And already, what have we seen? We've seen like billions of dollars worth of transactions being done, on a weekly basis, to do with various different applications. We've seen, the market capitalizations of, Ethereum and other like smart contract platforms, go up. We've seen the number of users go up dramatically, almost like a hockey stick graph. And that's all happened within like 9 years. And also keep in mind that some of the biggest use cases for blockchain technology, such as decentralized finance, that really got started in the beginning of 2020. So it's only been 4 years since DeFi really took off in any substantial fashion. And we already have like, a tremendous number of users. That being said, though, like obviously, the vast majority of the world, don't use blockchain technology in any way. They maybe heard of it, but don't really know how to use it. And they find it, difficult to manage wallets and, what is a transaction, understanding all of these terms, which I totally agree with you. But to use like another analogy, I kind of look at it as like the early days of the internet. It's very fascinating when you watch videos of, from 1995, 1996, 1997, when the internet just started emerging. And there's all these like talk show hosts talking about, there's this new thing called the internet. I don't really understand it. What's a web browser? How does a mouse and keyboard work? What does it mean to like go on a website, and, what's the URL and all that? And all these basic terms that basically everyone takes for granted now, that, there's second nature to all of us, whether we're technical or not. It wasn't so back then, because it was an emerging technology. And so they were interviewing people who were like early involved in the internet. And, those people were talking about, this is a web browser. This is how you connect to different websites. These are sort of the endless possibilities of what you can do on the internet. And they were like quite visionary at the time, right? And I think for blockchain technology, it's the same thing. It's like, the user experience, isn't that user friendly for, a wide range of audience, but it is getting better over time. The different wallets and tools coming out that make it like a lot easier for people to interact with the network. Initially we had, you had to start up a wallet by the command line. You had to know some, technical stuff to do it, and you didn't really have an interface. Now you have different wallet applications like Ravi and MetaMask and mobile wallets as well, that make the interface a lot easier to interact with cryptocurrencies. Also, you have like exchanges that run wallets and allow people to like log in and easily, buy and sell and interact with different blockchain networks. So I think the user experience will improve over time. At the same time, I also think that people's knowledge of how to use blockchain technology will also improve over time, right? A lot of people, as I mentioned before, didn't know how to go to a website and do stuff on the website now, right? But that's sort of second nature to us. A lot of, the vast majority of us know how to use a keyboard and a mouse and know how to access the internet. And we don't really think, twice about it. And I think there will be something similar with blockchain technology over the next, 5, 10, 20 years, in that it will just become more and more ubiquitous to us and sort of second nature. And in terms of like different applications that are out there, as I mentioned before, there's DeFi applications where instead of having to rely on like a third party to perform certain transactions, like borrowing from someone or collateralizing, the crypto that you have, or, swapping from one asset to another, instead of having to use a third party, which comes with risks and increased costs, you can basically rely on like a smart contract that, if it's coded correctly and it's transparent and anyone can see, how it works, what goes in, what goes out, then you can interact with the smart contract, and for sure that if you perform a certain transaction, like I'm swapping from one currency to another, that it's going to go through, that a middleman can't steal it, that it's not going to like just disappear. Which happens very, very often in traditional finance. There are some bad brokers out there who run away with people's money, unfortunately. But if you have a good smart contract, that's not going to really be the case. And there are many other different use cases that, we can talk about, but that's just like one that is, I think, a very powerful use case.
So let's talk about like maybe one case study with maybe, I don't know if you have any big brands on board or one partner who uses maybe a traditional company that uses Phantom as, their blockchain of choice, right? So, and somehow like maybe like like a sandbox, even if it's a pilot project or something that you can talk about like freely.
Yeah, sure. So a few years ago, we were actually working with the previous Afghanistan government about implementing a supply chain solution for the medicines, because Afghanistan has this big problem where even like what we call generic drugs or ordinary drugs that people use on a daily basis, there's a huge amount of counterfeiting. I think the number is somewhere around like 40% of drugs that enter, legal prescription drugs that enter into Afghanistan actually counterfeit goods, right? So, they're being substituted with poorer quality goods because there aren't really checks. So what we did with the previous Afghanistan government is that we worked with a few Indian pharmaceutical companies about labeling their products. And as they're distributed into pharmacies in Kabul, people can verify the authenticity of those drugs by comparing it to, hashes on the blockchain, which basically verifies that, this product is legitimate and it's not a counterfeit product. And we had like, thousands or tens of thousands of people use that product. We wanted to expand it more across Afghanistan, but unfortunately, this is in 2021. The Taliban then took over and the previous government was disposed. And obviously we stopped all operations in Afghanistan then. But that was like a real tangible, I guess like real world, like government use case of blockchain technology that we actually did implement back in Afghanistan a few years ago in early 2021. And so, supply chain management and being able to verify, physical goods or digital goods are like a big use case for blockchain technology. So that's like one example. And there are other examples, to do with like other like blockchains and companies where they've minted like a whole bunch of like NFTs, they've distributed the IP by creating, these non-fungible tokens or these digital goods on the blockchain that can be traded amongst different individuals. There are a lot of companies in the financial space, traditional banks, that are experimenting with blockchain technology about how they can, use it as a settlement layer. One example that unfortunately got canned in Australia was the Australian Securities Exchange, or the ASX, which basically runs like the biggest stock exchange in Australia. They were planning to implement like a blockchain-based solution for settlements of trade, because usually the settlements of trade requires the involvement of many parties. And that means that it could take, 1 or 2 days for the trade to settle. But with blockchain technology, because you have a lot of people basically looking at like a single distributed ledger that gets confirmed algorithmically between different parties, those like 1 or 2 days that it takes to confirm a trade, could be done in 1 or 2 seconds. But for various like, financial reasons and other reasons, not really to do with the blockchain technology itself, I believe, the Australian Securities Exchange stopped implementing that blockchain solution. But that is a very powerful solution that I think can be used in traditional finance to basically just make it a lot faster and also more secure, and also make it more secure to perform certain financial transactions, particularly when it involves many parties. Because even though like there are many aspects of the financial system that are robust, there are still mistakes that happen from time to time where the wrong transfer is done between different banks, and then it can cause tremendous amounts of issue in terms of getting the money back or reversing the transaction. So I think a lot of blockchain solutions in a more permissioned environment do also help solve that problem.
Oh, 100%. So there's a lot of interesting case studies, like actually in the United States, where the hedge funds were tokenized, or the exchanges were now exploring, like using it as an additional layer of protection for secure transactions. So many others. So if let's say someone like an exchange or the government or any other big corporation wants to work with you, right? So what are the first steps? Like, if you go to your your portal where you have docs.phantom.foundation, you have a section get started, and you have learn more about deploy a smart contract, use the API, stake FTM, or run a validator. So let's go really briefly one by one, right? Like for whom, let's say it makes sense, like each of this parallel dimensions for because if you're talking to a person from traditional finance, to run a validator, it will take you probably another half an hour to an hour to explain what is a validator first, right?
Yeah. So like if you think about it in terms of like corporates or in terms of like enterprise solutions, the docs are more targeted at like individual developers who just want to experiment with the blockchain network. And so they can go to, as you mentioned, the link docs.phantom.foundation, and they can see, how to set up a wallet, how to set up a node, how to like connect it to your MetaMask or whatever wallet provider that you use, and how do you start interacting with the chain and the applications there. For enterprises, it really is about like, walking them through the process and saying, hey, what is a problem that you want to solve, or what is a product that you want to launch, and how can blockchain technology be applied to that for solving that problem or for launching that product, right? So, for example, I got off a call earlier today from this like very well-known director who's looking at, implementing NFTs and doing a variety of different like solutions. And, he's very interested in blockchain technology because he sees the opportunity there about, issuing NFTs and about, other aspects of blockchain technology that can really like help enhance his business. So, for an individual like him, I wouldn't just be like, hey, just go to docs.phantom.foundation and then just like start playing around. It would more like, do a deal with them at a foundation level, give them, support, give them technical support, give them a grant, get them involved. And we'll do that by basically, helping them, launch the solution on Phantom and basically like build what they want to build on the distributed ledger itself. So when it comes to enterprises, it's more like, the foundation or various like interested parties on the chain work with them directly. We wouldn't just throw to them, the docs, but obviously, they want to look at the docs and play around with the network. We would share those docs with them, but we wouldn't just share those docs with them and say, you're kind of like on your own.
Yeah, of course, that makes sense. I'm sure it's a more wide glove solution when it comes to, bigger clients. It's more about the logic, what you would recommend to start to begin with, right? For someone who wants to try to work with you, right? And I think for a lot of like corporations, it's a bit challenging because there's so many other solutions, and if they don't know what differentiate you and how to start, how to begin with, it's just easier to have this conversation and to openly ask you as a CEO, right? What's the best, for example, if you were to suggest using API for, I don't know, for a bank, right? What would be your first suggestion? How can they apply it? And also, by the way, in terms of the grant, I think it's also a relevant question. What type of grants do you have and who are they directed to?
Yeah, sure. So to answer your first question, again, it like really depends on like what solution or what problem they have, right? So, if a bank, for example, wants to like experiment with our blockchain technology and they want to see how it works, we can share with them, the relevant documentation. So on that link that you mentioned, like docs.phantom.foundation, there are certain sections where it links to like APIs that connect to the Phantom network, right? And so people can go there and it walks you step by step about how you would connect to the Phantom network and how you would perform like certain transactions, etc. So definitely like technical documentation is very important. Obviously for developers to be able to launch their solutions on Phantom. And so, we would, work with a party and walk them through it and guide them as to like how to do that, right? Now in terms of like our grants, so what we're again like what we did in the past was really just focus more on the technology and say, if we build the tech, people will come. We think that has been the wrong approach, because even though the tech is important, in order for people to actually build applications on top of it, you obviously need to have a working tech that needs to be as scalable as possible. At the same time, you need to be very, very involved in growing your chain, especially initially, to get to be in a big chain. And that's what some of our competitors have done. So when it comes to like our grants, what we are doing now is giving, or planning to like give grants to certain like interested corporates or businesses that are looking to deploy a solution on Phantom, such that we can like help them cover the cost of delivering the technical solution and get them really interested and involved in using the Phantom technology. And the purpose there is to generate interest and volume for the Phantom ecosystem, right? To show that, okay, the use cases are not just like what we have at the moment, which is decentralized finance and some gaming, but also like all these corporates who want to do all sorts of different solutions, like I mentioned, NFT solutions or issuing NFTs or connecting with certain distributed AI opportunities that exist on blockchain, and then really demonstrating to people that, hey, not only is this chain just something that anybody can use, it's something that that corporates can also use as well and really derive a lot of benefit from it. And of course, there's a branding and association and validation that goes from it, that if someone is well known in a particular industry or well-known company is using the Phantom technology, that also is great validation that our technology is real and that we're like a real company, right? So the grants are done kind of like on a discretionary basis, and it really just depends on the opportunity that's available.
And if you were to speculate a little bit, like, in your projections for the future, right? So if you would take, I would say one of the hottest topics right now still is AI. Obviously, gaming is still hot, like DeFi is still relevant, right? Even though there is now beginning to be like a separate cohort of people who are very kind of negative towards the real DeFi applications and how they work, right? There's interesting debate there happening. But like if you were to bet on a particular niche, like on a direction, right? And not only for your like chain, but also for the general development of the market, what do you think is gonna be like the future like driver of the new user adoption?
So I think it's going to be like the existing use cases of Phantom that grow, and blockchain as general. I think they're going to grow substantially as well, just because the opportunity and the problems that they solve is really useful. So, as I mentioned before, decentralized finance, I think, is a huge opportunity. There's gaming and NFTs as well. There's a huge opportunity. There are certain like distributed AI use cases that also a significant opportunity. For example, being able to authenticate, whether something is AI generated or not, or who like the original creator of a certain content was, is one example of combining generative AI and the security of a blockchain. I think in terms of like newer use cases that are coming along, obviously AI is one of them that I just mentioned, but I also think there are other opportunities that a lot of people haven't really explored. I mean, one thing that I've repeatedly said over the past couple of years that I think is an underexplored opportunity, but it's something that other people need to do, because I'm not going to do it because I'm already busy at my job at Phantom, is to do with distributed or peer-to-peer insurance, right? So the idea there is that people amongst themselves, friends and family, create insurance pools, and they basically are like self-insurance, right? So people make regular contributions to an insurance pool, stay on a smart contract. When people want to make claims against it, you have like a jury of your peers in the insurance pool that evaluate your claim and make sure that it's legitimate, and you're not claiming too much, and it is like a genuine claim. And that's really, I think, a massive use case, because the problem with traditional insurance companies is that, one, obviously, like, insurance companies are big, they're expensive, there's a lot of overhead there, which means that the premiums for individuals contributing go up. But there's also the moral hazard that, like, when you make an insurance claim, you're sort of incentivized to make more of a claim than maybe you should really be making, right? Like, I've heard stories from a lot of people where, their car gets damaged in the storm, maybe it's the front of the car, but then like they go and get their car fixed, and they're getting all these other problems fixed and are unrelated to the damage. Why? Because there's a moral hazard that exists where a person is incentivized to kind of claim as much as they can against a big insurance company because it's the insurance company that has a lot of money. They're not really held accountable to the people paying the premiums, because there's a sort of like disconnect between the people paying the premiums and the people claiming, thanks to the middleman. But if you remove like the middleman insurance company and you're directly accountable to all of the people that pay into the pools, including yourself, right? Say your friends and your family, you're less likely to want to try and screw over your friends and your family by making an excessive claim, because of that level of transparency that you have with the people around you. And so I think like P2P insurance is a very powerful, multi-billion-dollar opportunity that solves a lot of problems with traditional insurance, that if done correctly, which is quite complicated because there's so many aspects of insurance, obviously, it could save people a lot of money where, their premiums not only go down, but maybe they even make money from taking out insurance, because those premiums could be paid into a pot that get invested in DeFi or other opportunities. Maybe people don't make enough claims around you, and now you're actually making returns on the premiums that you paid in, rather than you just paying out premiums and not getting anything back.
It's actually interesting that you mentioned, and I have a friend who's working exactly on such solution. So, I think you should guys talk with each other.
Yeah, I'm really bullish on those sorts of applications. I really am.
And that, you see, it's amazing how world works, perfectly. Some people are like thinking about them and bullish, and some people already like are in the making of them, right? So, not to also steer away from the other question I asked you, like the grants. I think a lot of people who are watching, they also want to know, what are the Phantom grants? How big are they? What are the terms, to get the grants, and what are the, the conditions?
Yeah, so we're looking for protocols that can be really successful on chain, because essentially, if a protocol is very successful, generates a lot of transactions, generate a lot of total value locked, or TVL, a lot of asset transfers, that really benefits, the Phantom network. Because essentially what our aim is in growing the Phantom ecosystem is basically getting large numbers of transactions being generated on a daily basis, which requires users and developers. So, if people are building, an application that you think has a lot of potential, the grants that, we offer could be, in the thousands of dollars to millions of dollars. And so we are in the process now of giving out discretionary grants, and not just grants, but also like liquidity incentives. So, providing rewards for, DeFi pools. So, you can generate traction for those sorts of protocols, and also liquidity mining, where we actually add our own, like, treasury, or part of our own treasury to, increasing the TVL for certain DeFi applications, which are like the metrics there. Or if someone has like, a really popular game that they want to deploy, or, distributed AI idea that they want to launch on Phantom, we would also be willing to support that with a grant where, if they hit certain milestones and they really contribute, fantastically to the Phantom ecosystem, they could be potentially making millions of dollars for themselves. So this is, I think, a big, I think this is like in stark contrast to where we were before. So as I mentioned before, we didn't really have much of a grants program. We didn't really have many business development initiatives. We were just really focused on building the technology and saying that, okay, we build the tech, people will come. But we obviously have built the tech, and we continue to build tech, but we also need to encourage people to actually use the Phantom technology or use the Sonic technology. And that's how we basically get big. So anyone who wants to apply for a grant on a discretionary basis can just reach out to me. They can reach out to the Phantom team, and we'll evaluate each and every opportunity.
Where they can reach you? Where do you spend most of your time? Is it LinkedIn, Twitter? Is this some other decentralized networks?
Yeah, so people can message us on Twitter. We're very active on Twitter, as are a lot of people in the space. So people can reach us at Phantom FDN. So at Phantom FDN is, or at FANTOM FDN is our official Twitter handle. People can also reach out to me at my Twitter handle, which is Michael F. Kong. So Michael F. KONG. And, I will reply and look at like what people send me. And so, those are probably the two most popular areas. But if you go to our official website as well, phantom.foundation, and you scroll to the bottom, and you can see our socials and how to contact us, that's also another avenue as well.
So before we wrap up, like I also want to ask you, like, to dream a little bit, right? You know, if you, I mean, I know that's like every year in crypto is like 10 years in traditional finance, right? But still, if we were to anticipate what's going to be in the future a little bit, let's talk about like 3 to 5 years ahead, right? You know, what do you think are going to be the biggest trends for the future of the blockchain as technology?
I think the biggest trends are going to be, a continuation of what's already quite popular. So decentralized finance, gaming, now AI is emerging. I think also insurance technology on the blockchain, as we just talked about, I think is going to be a huge game changer. And I think in general, like there's just going to be a lot of people that are going to be coming to the blockchain space like over the years, right? Like each year, if you look at the number of people using blockchain technology, it just keeps going up and up and up. And it is an exponential growth, right? Growth rate, because the way that networks work is that one friend talks to two friends, which talk to four friends and eight friends, etc. I mean, the reason I got into like building smart contract based technology or the blockchain industry to begin with is because a friend of mine was already involved in Ethereum or already knew about Ethereum and then told me about it, and I went around telling other people about it as well. And so I think like you see like certain events take place, such as the Bitcoin ETFs, which are really a massive deal, and they're really a massive deal because they just open up, a lot of like institutional players, that open up a lot of individuals to be able to like, first of all, invest in Bitcoin and blockchain opportunities, but also start to learn more about the technology and say, hey, this is a big deal. My institution, the people around me are talking about blockchain technology. They're talking about all the different use cases. Let me go explore and play with it myself, right? And so I think all of the use cases will grow substantially. There are other use cases as well, like supply chain management that I mentioned an example about, which could, which is a great use case for blockchain technology. And each of those industries themselves are worth, hundreds of billions, if not trillions of dollars. And so I think like with blockchain technology, there is a bit of a habit with some people in the space that say, oh, you can put everything on the blockchain, right? The blockchain is just this like ultimate solution to everything. I don't agree with that. I think the blockchain technology is a specific technology for specific purposes. And so all those sort of use cases I mentioned before, I do really believe that they are very, very important use cases for blockchain technology that are basically not possible in other technologies, right? And they're not possible because, you don't have the certain security guarantees as you do with, blockchain technology that enables, for example, decentralized finance to occur. You can't have decentralized finance occur on a centralized server. Otherwise, that means that you're basically back to square one with the problem, right? In that you're trusting the person or a third party that they're not going to change your transactions, they're not going to steal your money or anything like that, thus kind of defeating the purpose of decentralized finance. But if you run decentralized finance with the security of a public blockchain, then it solves for all the security problems that I just talked about.
Yeah, I mean, it's there's definitely a lot of challenges, so we have to solve as an industry, right? And then you have individual battles that you solve in as a company, and then we have like collective responsibility towards the community. But we all do this for a purpose, for a reason. Therefore, my last question to you for today is also personal. And I never, I specifically, I would say, never, do the preemptive strike. I never tell people what's going to be the question because I want it to be as genuine, as authentic as possible. So here goes the question. So, what is the meaning of life to you, Michael?
I think the meaning of life is to live as virtuously as possible, right? To live a good life is to, I think, in my opinion, follow a set of like morals and values that are kind of derived logically from first principles. And it really comes down to like, this is why like I'm a like libertarian, right? A lot of people think, oh, libertarianism is just like a political philosophy about, free markets and, capitalism and being free. And that's all kind of true. But it really comes down to like, we as individuals are autonomous beings, and we have the ability to interact with our environment around us. And we have the capacity to be able to acquire property, right? And therefore, property rights are logically derived from the way that we exist as human beings, right? And when you extrapolate from the idea of property rights, it means that, you have a right to be free, you have a right to, to have free speech, you have a right for bodily autonomy, You have a right to basically like live the way that you want to live with the people around you that you choose you want to live with, right? And so that's where like I kind of derive my overall philosophy of life from. It's very different from, I guess, like, you know, we got this like secular ethics. Is very different from saying, oh, you know, it's derived from God or it's derived from a certain being and that sort of thing. I think more importantly, it's derived from the fact that we exist as human beings and we're capable of thought and reason and, you know, and consciousness, which is what makes us very unique from, you know, all the other species, right? All the other species like animals, they all follow instinct, they all follow evolution, they all follow, I guess you can say, like particular programming in the way that they operate, right? Now humans obviously still have, you know, evolutionary instincts. You know, we didn't have those evolutionary instincts, you know, babies wouldn't be able to grow up, right? And, you know, would all be dead. But we also have transcended that by being able to recognize things like property rights and consciousness and sort of look inward and to know, like, you know, have self-awareness essentially. So I'll stop there.
Beautiful. No, I think it's a very profound answer. Thank you. Thank you so much for this answer. Thank you so much for your wisdom, for sharing this today with us. You know, again, we're definitely going to share all the context that you mentioned in this description, right? And yeah, I sincerely wish Phantom Foundation a lot of luck, a lot of prosperity, a lot more development, greater adoption, and make sure that like you share this amazing technology with millions of people.
Well, thanks so much for your time. Yeah, again, like really appreciate it.